Millionaire took his mistress on vacation while his pregnant wife was on bedrest. In a world of gleaming penthouses, whispered scandals, and diamonds that sparkle under relentless city lights, sometimes the worst betrayals happen in the quietest corners of a gilded home. Our story follows a man who had everything: money, prestige, and a radiant wife carrying his unborn child. But behind the marble walls and shimmering chandeliers, he was consumed by secrets that refused to stay in the shadows. When a vacation became more than just an innocent escape and a mistress's presence threatened an entire family's future, fault lines fractured beneath the polished surface. Prepare yourself for a tale that proves, once again, that wealth cannot buy loyalty, nor can fame shield us from heartbreak. Alexander Pierce had grown used to the constant hum of admiration. From the time he was a teenager mowing lawns in the quaint suburb of Rivercrest, he'd heard murmurs of just how special he was. He had the business spark, they said, that rare visionary gleam. By the age of 30, Alexander was already a millionaire, driving a sleek imported car through the same streets where he once pushed his tattered lawnmower. Folks would wave and whisper his name as he passed, heads turning in awe. Over time, Alexander transformed his early landscaping hustle into a commercial real estate empire. He built apartments, office towers, and eventually upscale hotels. As the money rolled in, he found his name cited in local business magazines, right alongside established moguls. He met influential leaders, from corporate executives to community organizers, who all wanted a slice of his intelligence and his wealth. He was unstoppable, or so he believed. In those early days, he fell in love with Clara Hoffman, a bright and compassionate nurse he met during a charity fundraiser for underprivileged children. Her warm smile, genuine concern for others, and quiet strength immediately captivated him. Perhaps it was the contrast: where he was loud, she was gentle; where he chased opulence, she found joy in simplicity. They were married in a flurry of celebration at a scenic vineyard on the outskirts of town, surrounded by high-profile guests, but also by the local families who cherished Clara's kind soul. For Alexander, marriage was a crowning achievement, yet it quickly fell behind his financial conquests in terms of everyday focus. While he adored Clara, he often found himself swallowed up by the frantic pace of his business expansions. She supported him wholeheartedly, never voicing a single complaint about his late nights or missed dinners. After all, she understood his ambitions, and she believed wholeheartedly in his dreams because, in many ways, she was one of them. Whenever he would come home, exhausted but triumphant over closing another major deal, Clara welcomed him with unconditional love, a warm meal and a steadfast devotion. But quiet cracks form even in the most formidable armor. Underneath the glow of success, Alexander's hunger for something more, a sense of danger, an adrenaline rush he couldn't quite name, began to eat away at him. He'd started noticing fleeting attention from certain circles, flattering words, suggestive glances from women at high-end galas, even quiet enticements at business mixers. With every new real estate triumph, his confidence grew, and with it a silent restlessness whispered, "Is this really all there is?" Life changed the moment Clara announced her pregnancy. Alexander, initially taken aback, felt his heart swell with a new kind of excitement. He had always imagined a future with children he pictured strolling with a small boy or girl through the gardens of his freshly built estates, teaching them about hard work and ambition. Clara's eyes sparkled with joy, and Alexander, for a moment, believed this child would anchor them more firmly together. Months passed, and for a while the Pierces found bliss. Alexander would shift board meetings around just to be there for Clara's ultrasound appointments. He'd come home early to see her cradle her slightly swollen belly in front of the mirror, And in those moments, he felt the stirrings of genuine happiness. Clara, who had always been gentle and nurturing, was practically radiant. She imagined a world of bedtime stories, baby blankets, and sweet lullabies. Together, they picked out a soft, pale green color for the nursery walls, carefully selected a crib crafted from sustainable wood, and even started discussing baby names over dinner. But fate, as it often does, had another plan. Just as Clara reached her 6th month of pregnancy, complications arose. She fainted one morning while simply trying to fix breakfast. Rushed to the hospital, she was diagnosed with a condition that demanded constant bed rest to protect both her health and that of the unborn child. Although the specialists assured the couple that everything could still go smoothly if Clara avoided strain or stress, it felt like their perfect world now teetered on the edge. The new situation required changes. Clara's mother, Karen Hoffman herself, a seasoned nurse, moved in to help. She and Clara never expected they would need such intense care, but Karen was determined to ensure her daughter and future grandchild stayed healthy. As Karen settled in, she kept a watchful eye on everything, quietly noticing how Alexander's work schedule barely allowed him any time at home. She told herself that he was busy providing for his family, but a gnawing doubt nibbled at the corners of her thoughts. Could he be there more? Alexander's routine was indeed relentless. Business lunches in high-rise boardrooms, negotiations with foreign investors, brand-building events at art galleries, and the occasional late-night gatherings at upscale clubs. Since Clara could no longer accompany him due to bed rest, he navigated these social waters alone. At times, he caught himself feeling uneasy about the situation. After all, he was a married man whose pregnant wife was confined at home. Still, whenever these pangs of guilt surfaced, he pushed them away. For a man used to conquering challenges, he believed his life was still under control. Enter Ava Beaumont, charismatic, with a sleek bob of dark hair and an air of quiet sophistication. She was the newest public relations consultant Alexander had hired for a special project. She was recommended to him by a mutual acquaintance at an exclusive charity gala, someone who praised her ability to manage both press relations and brand image for powerful figures. Intrigued, Alexander arranged a meeting. At first glance, Ava seemed entirely professional. She arrived at his office impeccably dressed, her briefcase filled with brand analyses and marketing strategies. There was something magnetic about her presence, though, and it only intensified when they talked. She had a keen sense of humor, an easy laugh that made her approachable, and a knack for listening in a way that made a person feel deeply understood. During that first consultation, she outlined how to strengthen Alexander's public persona, ensuring that his philanthropic initiatives like funding local children's hospitals received the attention they deserved. Alexander was impressed. People rarely impressed him anymore, given his years in high-stakes business circles. Yet Ava's style was refreshingly energetic. He decided to hire her on the spot, a move that raised eyebrows among some of his long-time associates. She was still young, but her reputation soared among insiders. She must have some serious talent if so many big names have vouched for her, Alexander thought, ignoring the mild disapproval from older colleagues. Even Karen, while visiting the office to deliver some documents from Clara, noticed the buzz around Ava's name. Their work relationship began innocently enough. Countless business dinners in sophisticated restaurants became the norm. After all, they needed to strategize away from the hustle of the office, away from the prying eyes of the press. Over salted caramel desserts and expensive wine, they spoke about budgets, philanthropic outreaches, upcoming real estate developments, and how to steer the narrative so that Alexander Pierce appeared not just as a real estate mogul, but as a patron of innovation and philanthropy. It's all for the brand, Alexander told himself, yet beneath that veneer of professionalism, a tension simmered. The gentle brush of hands when exchanging paperwork, the lingering glances that lasted a second too long, the playful banter that veered into personal territory, these were all signs of a subtle but growing flame. Ava seemed aware of Alexander's marriage. She even asked how Clara was doing, feigning concern. But her sympathy ended there. Late-night phone calls about urgent brand issues often slid into flirtatious territory. Her compliments became more personal, her voice softer, her laughter more inviting. Alexander rationalized it. I'm just bored, overworked, lonely in my successes, and craving excitement. He convinced himself he could handle a friendly flirtation, that it was a harmless spark in a business partnership. But invisible lines, once crossed, are rarely undone. And the moment Alexander invited Ava onto his private yacht for an informal meeting, it became clear that they were heading down a treacherous path, one where the fortress of his public image could shatter under a single, careless misstep. Back at home, Clara's Bedrest routine became a mundane cycle. She watched the world pass by through the bedroom window. A small glimpse of manicured lawns, the mailman's daily arrival, and the steady hum of neighborhood gossip was all she could grasp from her confined vantage point. Karen did her best to lift her daughter's spirits, chatting about everything from baby gear recommendations to old family memories. Yet, as days stretched into weeks, Clara's initial positivity waned under the weight of her isolation. Her husband's presence was another missing puzzle piece. Alexander made efforts in the beginning, bringing flowers, ordering gourmet takeout so she wouldn't miss out on fine dining, even sending her sweet text messages about how proud he was of her for being so strong. But those gestures tapered off. Soon enough, his calls became shorter and his visits briefer. Clara told herself he was busy. She reasoned that the new developments he was building required more of his time and that business expansions never slowed down. She also trusted him. Trust was something she'd never questioned, at least not until lonely nights and her own vulnerable state forced her to reevaluate. Word of Alexander's dinners with Ava occasionally reached Clara's ears through the carefully filtered gossip pipeline. A friend of Karen's saw them at a chic bistro one evening. The friend mentioned how perfectly matched they looked, discussing business over glasses of red wine. When Karen heard this, she felt a pang of concern. But she tried to reassure Clara that appearances could be deceiving, that Alexander often dined with associates. It's the nature of his work, Karen insisted, yet the seeds of doubt took root. Clara tried to push away suspicion. She reminded herself that her husband was a man of power and influence. Business dinners, especially with someone who managed his public image, were part of the package. The more she told herself this, however, the more she realized how little she truly knew about Alexander's daily life anymore. When did we stop talking about everything? When did I become an afterthought? One day, as she lay in bed reading a parenting magazine, Clara's phone buzzed with a message. It was Alexander saying he would be out of town for a weekend trip to the West Coast to meet a potential investor. Although she tried to be supportive, her heart sank. She typed back a few encouraging words. Good luck. Be safe, but tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't help but wonder if his distant behavior was because something else or someone else had captured his focus. Unbeknownst to Clara, the potential investor meeting was a lie. In truth, Alexander was headed for an intimate weekend in Aspen with Ava. It was all arranged quietly. A private jet departing late on a Friday night, luxurious accommodations in a secluded chalet, days spent skiing, and nights spent in front of a roaring fire. Just a brief escape, Alexander told himself. He would be back on Monday, resuming life as the devoted husband. He wanted excitement, he just never considered the price of stepping outside the bounds of his marriage at such a critical time. Aspen's crisp mountain air greeted Alexander and Ava as they stepped off the private jet late on a Friday night. Swirls of snowflakes danced around them, illuminated by the dim runway lights. An eager chauffeur in a tailored uniform welcomed them with a cordial nod and escorted them to a sleek, black SUV. With tinted windows shielding their identities from prying eyes, they wound through winding forest roads toward the exclusive chalet Alexander had arranged. The chalet itself was tucked into a remote slope, surrounded by towering pines and blanketed by fresh snowfall. Its wooden beams, tall glass panels, and glowing lanterns conveyed both rustic charm and high-end luxury, the perfect retreat for two people seeking anonymity. Inside, the staff awaited them with quiet efficiency. A private chef, a butler, and a few housekeepers, each one trained to handle high-profile guests, without question whisked away luggage, offered warm towels, and poured glasses of aged whiskey by the crackling fire. No one asked about the identity of the beautiful woman with Alexander, nor did they acknowledge that he wore no wedding band. Discretion was part of the chalet's allure, and everyone was well compensated for their silence. From the moment they set foot in the lavish living room, a fierce tension crackled between Alexander and Ava. She draped her arms around his neck, leaning into him with a sly smile as she inhaled the scent of pine drifting in through the open windows. This was their world, if only for the weekend, a hidden paradise where judgments and obligations faded, replaced by the heady thrill of doing what they both knew was forbidden. Alexander felt his pulse quicken at her touch, each kiss fueling his conflicted desire. He told himself he deserved a break from his relentless schedule. His entire life had been about building an empire, perhaps. For once, he was entitled to indulge. They wasted no time settling into the chalet's master suite. Ava admired the sleek interior design, a massive four-poster bed with plush white linens, a private fireplace, and a balcony overlooking panoramic views of twinkling ski slopes below. The second their luggage was set down, they were in each other's arms, lost in a whirlwind of heated kisses and tangled sheets. Hours later, they re-emerged for dinner, both wearing contented smiles. A decadent 5-course meal awaited them in the dining room, courtesy of the private chef who skillfully combined local ingredients with gourmet flair. Each bite of creamy risotto and herb-crusted lamb felt like a proclamation of their stolen moments, a feast spiced by the rush of secrecy. The following morning, they rose early to catch the best ski runs. The chalet's butler helped them into tailored ski gear, while the chef packed a thermos of hot cocoa and fresh pastries. Ava, a novice on the slopes, giggled with excitement. She trailed behind Alexander as he led her down gentle trails, offering pointers with a mischievous grin. Their laughter rang through the cold air, two people reveling in fleeting freedom. Occasionally, a fellow skier would glance their way, perhaps recognizing Alexander's famous jawline from local news stories, but the short glimpses never lasted. In a place like Aspen, wealthy visitors were commonplace, and staff or bystanders rarely pried. Yet, despite the picturesque scenery and Ava's vivacious company, Alexander felt pangs of guilt sharpen each time they stopped to rest. Whenever he checked his phone, he was reminded of the real world he had left behind, a world where Clara was confined to Bedrest, quietly enduring a challenging pregnancy on her own. Between runs, he found himself scrolling through old photos of Clara, imagining her gentleness and unyielding loyalty. Even the crisp mountain breeze couldn't blow away the weight of betrayal pressing on his conscience. Over lunch at a chic slope-side bistro, Ava posted carefully selected images to her private social media feed. A shot of her resting on the chalet's balcony, the faintest outline of Alexander's silhouette in the background, a boomerang of her swirling a glass of fine wine. She never tagged him by name. She wasn't that reckless, but she enjoyed dropping subtle hints that hinted at opulence. Her inner circle, curious and hungry for gossip, sent messages brimming with curiosity. A secret romance? A millionaire companion? The speculation fueled AVA's vanity, and she relished every digital comment and like that flowed her way. That evening, after a long day on the slopes, they returned to the chalet. The staff had prepared a candlelit dinner in front of the roaring fireplace. Truffle risotto, seared scallops, and a decadent chocolate soufflé, every dish heightened the sense of indulgence. But the flavors were layered with Alexander's mounting remorse. He would sneak glances at his phone, scanning for any messages from Clara or updates about her condition. Several times he caught himself about to text her a simple "I love you" or "I miss you," but the words felt hollow in the moment. What right did he have to profess devotion when he was in the arms of another woman? Ava sensed his ambivalence, but dismissed it as a phase he would overcome. In her eyes, their connection had evolved far beyond a mere fling. She envisioned a future where his marriage was little more than a footnote he'd soon erase. Whenever he hesitated, she took it upon herself to remind him of the thrill they shared. A sly smile, a whispered promise of the night's private delights, or a flirtatious joke at the dinner table. Ava was adept at refocusing his attention whenever remorse threatened to steal him away. Still, reality's intrusion arrived on their second night, fracturing the fantasy they had so carefully crafted. While Ava slipped into a silk robe after dinner, Alexander scrolled through his phone to find a text message from Karen, a brief but alarming note stating that Clara had nearly fainted once more and was taken in for urgent tests. The baby remained stable, but doctors insisted that she stay vigilant, minimize all stress, and possibly prepare for an extended hospital stay if her condition worsened. Alexander's heart pounded. He excused himself and stepped out onto the chalet's balcony, letting the frigid wind sting his skin as he dialed Clara's number. She sounded faint, but tried to assure him she was doing okay. Her voice quivered with uncertainty. Overwhelmed by guilt and fear, Alexander lied through his teeth about how work negotiations in the West Coast had extended longer than expected. She believed him, or at least, she wanted to believe him. When he hung up, the weight of his betrayal settled like a lead blanket over his shoulders. He stared into the star-freckled sky, wrestling with his conscience. Back inside, Ava found him pale and pensive. "Everything all right?" she asked, reaching for his hand. He hesitated for a beat, then forced a tight smile. "Just business," he replied. Ava studied him, her eyes filled with curiosity. Although she suspected the call had something to do with Clara, she chose not to press. Part of Ava's strategy was never appearing threatened by Alexander's home life. So she changed the subject, diverting him with soft kisses and murmured excitement about the next day's plans. Caught in the crossroads of guilt and desire, Alexander let himself be led back to the comforting warmth of her embrace. Yet even as they sank onto the plush sofa in front of the fire, he couldn't shake the thought that he was stepping further into a labyrinth from which it might be impossible to return. The weekend was meant to be a brief retreat from the complications of his world, a stolen interlude for excitement. Instead, it was fast becoming a critical junction that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. And with every kiss Ava pressed against his lips, Alexander wondered if this forbidden pleasure would be worth the price he would inevitably have to pay. Word began to spread among Alexander's close-knit employees. A personal assistant noticed the dates on his travel itinerary didn't match any official investor meetings. A long-time driver was suspicious when Aspen kept cropping up with no mention of an actual business function. Whispers floated through the corridors of Alexander Pierce Enterprises, and some staff members even exchanged knowing glances whenever Ava's name appeared in conversation. Despite their reservations, few dared approach him directly. Alexander was the boss, a man whose wealth and influence could make or break a career in a heartbeat. One individual, however, found herself increasingly torn about keeping silent. Veronica Slater, Alexander's longtime executive secretary, had witnessed his rise from a daring young entrepreneur to a self-assured mogul. She had watched him fall in love with Clara, sending weekly flower bouquets to the hospital ward where Clara worked, just to brighten her shifts. Over the years, Veronica came to admire not just Alexander's ambition, but also Clara's gentle spirit. She had attended the couple's wedding, seen their joy, heard the earnest vows they exchanged under a summer sun. To see Alexander entangled with Ava shook Veronica deeply. As the rumors escalated, Veronica began to worry about Clara, especially given her delicate pregnancy. She wrestled with the dilemma: should I tell Clara the truth, risking my job, or is it better to keep quiet and hope Alexander sorts out his affairs before it's too late? Loyalty pulled her in different directions: loyalty to Alexander as her employer and loyalty to Clara as a woman deserving honesty. The tension became unbearable after Veronica received a call from Karen, who had rung the office to find out why Alexander hadn't returned home the previous night. Clara had grown even more anxious, and Karen suspected something was amiss. Over the phone, Karen politely asked if Veronica could confirm that Alexander was truly on a work trip. Veronica, torn, fumbled through a vague confirmation, her heart pounding. She hated lying, but she also feared revealing too much. After ending the call, she slumped in her chair, staring at the phone like it was a coiled serpent. Meanwhile, Alexander returned from Aspen on a Monday morning, looking both exhilarated and drained. He breezed through the office, greeting staff with a bright smile that seemed to mask deeper turmoil. Ava arrived shortly thereafter, her own demeanor brimming with private triumph. Veronica watched them from behind her desk, stomach churning. How long before Clara puts the pieces together? That same evening, Alexander finally made it home to find Clara asleep in their bedroom. He kissed her forehead and slipped under the covers, still smelling of winter pine and expensive cologne. She stirred awake briefly, murmuring how glad she was he was back. He felt her hand, tender and trusting, reach for his. Guilt stabbed him. He wondered how much longer he could maintain the facade before it all came crashing down. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the Pierce household became increasingly strained. Karen, noticing Alexander's detachment, grew suspicious. She would catch him scrolling through his phone at odd hours, smiling at messages he refused to discuss. Clara, on the other hand, tried to remain upbeat for the sake of her baby. Yet she sensed a distinct shift. Though Alexander was physically present more often, perhaps out of guilt, he seemed mentally elsewhere. Their conversations were clipped, their once easy banter replaced by forced pleasantries. One afternoon, as Clara dozed in bed, the doorbell rang. Karen answered to find a courier delivering an extravagant bouquet of lilies, red roses, and baby's breath. Nestled in the flowers was a note, addressed to Alexander with a teasing line: "Remember our last getaway? Here's to planning the next one soon." A heart pounding, Karen quickly tucked the card away, thanked the courier, and carried the bouquet to the kitchen. She knew she had stumbled upon something far more tangible than mere rumors. For a moment, she considered confronting Alexander with it, but fear of upsetting her pregnant daughter and risking further stress stayed her hand. That evening, Karen quietly pulled Veronica's number from Clara's phone. She rang the secretary once Clara was asleep, speaking in hushed tones. The conversation was hesitant at first, but Karen's desperation soon unlocked Veronica's conscience. In a shaky voice, Veronica confirmed what Karen had suspected, that Alexander was indeed in a romantic entanglement with Ava Beaumont. She apologized profusely for not speaking up sooner, expressing her loyalty to Clara and her anguish at keeping such a secret. Karen, furious and heartbroken, thanked her for finally telling the truth. She hung up, trembling with outrage and concern. For hours, Karen paced the living room, debating how to reveal this to Clara. The doctor's warnings about stress echoed in her mind. She knew any shock could lead to complications. But the deception was too enormous to conceal. As if on cue, Alexander walked in, noticing the bouquet on the kitchen table. His face paled when he spotted the card. He swiftly took it in hand, only to discover that the envelope had been neatly torn open. He locked eyes with Karen, who glared at him with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. In a calm but ice-cold voice, Karen confronted him. "Who is Ava? And what are you doing with her while my daughter is confined to this bed?" The question hung in the air, a challenge impossible to dodge. Caught off guard, Alexander stood speechless. He glanced over at the hallway leading to Clara's room. For the first time since his fling began, he felt the walls of his deception closing in, threatening to suffocate him. An unspoken dread pulsed in the space between them. If Clara found out, what kind of devastation might follow? Caught red-handed, Alexander struggled to piece together a coherent defense. Karen was unrelenting, her face set in a fury that even Alexander's legendary charm couldn't soften. "You swore to protect and love Clara," she hissed, voice trembling with equal parts anger and heartbreak. "How could you even think of running around with another woman, especially when my daughter's life and your child's life depend on her peace of mind?" Alexander, for once in his life, seemed at a total loss. He apologized in disjointed phrases, insisting he never meant to hurt Clara, that his affair with Ava was a mistake, a moment of weakness spun out of control. Karen stared at him, her eyes flashing. "A mistake is tripping over a curb, Alexander," she snapped. "This is a betrayal, and you don't get to decide how much it will cost you or my daughter." In that moment, Clara's voice called from the bedroom, weak but audible. "Mom? Alexander? Everything okay?" Karen swallowed, her anger momentarily tempered by the instinct to protect her daughter. She turned to Alexander, her voice low and urgent. "You need to tell her. So help me, if you don't, I will." With that, Karen marched down the hall to Clara's room, leaving Alexander to confront his guilt and mounting panic. That night, Alexander tried to muster the courage for a confession, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He told Clara that the bouquet was from a business associate expressing gratitude, and Karen, steeling herself, remained silent. Clara sensed tension, but dismissed it as another side effect of her bedrest predicament. Exhausted, she fell asleep without pressing further. In the days that followed, Karen and Alexander reached an uneasy truce. She threatened to expose him if he so much as thought of contacting Ava, but also recognized the danger of unleashing her fury on Clara in her delicate state. Alexander, desperate to keep his marriage intact and terrified of harming the baby, reluctantly agreed to cease all communication with Ava for the time being. He even blocked her number from his personal phone and swore to Karen he'd put an end to the affair. Ava, however, was not one to be brushed aside so easily. She called Alexander repeatedly, left messages at his office, and even showed up unexpectedly in the company lobby. Veronica, who had once handled Ava's visits with professional courtesy, now refused to let her pass the reception desk unless she had an official appointment. Seething with frustration, Ava felt her hold over Alexander slipping, and beneath her cool exterior, jealousy coiled like a serpent. She refused to be dismissed, especially not after he had promised her so much. He wouldn't dare cut me off like this, not after everything. With Ava temporarily out of the picture, Alexander attempted to focus on Clara's well-being. He spent more evenings at home, assisted her with her dietary restrictions, and tried to bring laughter back into the house. For a moment, it looked as though their marriage might survive the storm. Karen watched this renewed effort with guarded relief. Though her resentment for Alexander burned brightly, she recognized that keeping Clara and the baby stable took precedence. Still, the tension gnawed at Alexander. Each day that passed without a word from Ava made him both anxious and oddly resentful. He had grown used to the thrill of her texts, the spark of clandestine meetings. Now, with a vow of silence forced upon him, his mind was a battlefield. Part of him missed her. Another part knew he was toying with disaster. And overshadowing it all was a sinking dread that his betrayal could become public knowledge at any moment, destroying everything he'd worked for: family, fortune, and reputation. One late afternoon, as Clara rested, the landline phone rang. Karen answered. On the other end was a trembling voice belonging to Monica Friedman, a longtime friend of Clara's from her nursing days. Monica was calling to inform them of some unsettling rumors circulating around Rivercrest. She had overheard a group at the local cafe discussing how Alexander Pierce had been spotted on more than one occasion with a mysterious brunette, most recently at an exclusive ski resort in Aspen. Monica, worried sick for her friend, wanted to ensure Clara was shielded from such harmful gossip. Karen felt her pulse hammer. After ending the call, she summoned Alexander into the living room, her voice quivering as she relayed what she'd just heard. Alexander's face went pale, and he sank into the nearest chair. "This is bad," he muttered. "Really bad. If word spreads that I've been unfaithful, especially now." Karen nodded grimly, her eyes filled with concern. They agreed to keep Clara away from social media and local chatter until the storm settled. But it was a fragile plan at best. Yet fate intervened in a way neither of them could have predicted. Clara, feeling restless, decided to check her phone. She'd posted a baby bump photo the week before, and curiosity got the better of her. Scrolling through comments, she stumbled upon a thread of well-meaning acquaintances congratulating her on the pregnancy, but among the supportive messages lurked a cryptic post. "Heard Alexander had a great time in Aspen last month. Too bad you couldn't join him." Confused and alarmed, Clara clicked on the user's profile, but found nothing that clarified the remark. A sharp wave of anxiety seized her. Why would they mention Aspen? Alexander had never mentioned Aspen. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling hand. With a knot forming in her stomach, she realized something about her husband's West Coast investor trip no longer added up. Heart pounding, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and struggled to stand, ignoring the doctor's orders. "I need the truth now." Despite her weakened state, Clara managed to shuffle into the living room, where she found Karen and Alexander engaged in hushed conversation. Their startled faces told her everything she needed to know. "Somebody explain Aspen to me," she demanded, voice trembling. The air thickened with tension as Karen shot Alexander a glare, silently urging him to finally reveal the truth. Alexander swallowed hard, feeling cornered. He led Clara to the couch and knelt beside her, grasping her hands. "I should have told you sooner," he began, his voice thick with remorse. "I went to Aspen with someone else. Her name is Ava. It was never supposed to become what it did." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she listened. She felt her entire body quake, a surge of betrayal and heartbreak threatening to overwhelm her. She looked to Karen, who confirmed Alexander's admission with a solemn nod. "You should rest, honey. This isn't good for your condition," Karen pleaded, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. But Clara was beyond reason. Her sorrow turned swiftly to anger. "You left me here on Bedrest, afraid, lonely, trying to protect our baby, and you ran off with another woman," she choked out between sobs. Alexander tried to console her, but she pulled away. The emotional toll was too great. As the gravity of Alexander's infidelity sank in, Clara felt her body go into a tailspin. Dizziness and nausea battered her senses. Karen panicked, urging Alexander to help carry Clara back to bed. Within minutes, her doctor was called. The stress had triggered a dangerous spike in her blood pressure, putting her pregnancy at risk. A hushed sense of terror loomed as Alexander realized his affair might cost him far more than just his marriage. Clara spent the next 48 hours under strict medical observation. Alexander barely left her side, racked with guilt. He held her hand, speaking softly whenever she was awake enough to hear him. "I'm sorry," he repeated like a broken mantra. Karen hovered protectively, ensuring her daughter received everything she needed. She allowed Alexander to remain in the room, but her steely glare reminded him that she held him personally responsible for Clara's deteriorating condition. Meanwhile, Ava, sensing Alexander's silence, escalated her attempts at contact. Veronica deflected her calls, each time more insistently. "He's unavailable," she repeated, though her voice trembled with each lie. Ava grew furious, suspecting that Alexander was being held hostage by domestic drama, and that it was only a matter of time before he turned back to her for solace, or so she believed. A new level of pain had settled over the Pierce household. Alexander watched the love of his life suffer and realized how deeply he'd wounded her, how reckless his thirst for excitement had been. Fear gripped him that Clara would never forgive him, or worse, that their baby might be harmed by the stress. In those tense days, as Clara lay with eyes half closed in quiet agony, Alexander felt an unfamiliar emotion clawing at him, true remorse, the kind that even money or reputation couldn't wash away. Amid the turmoil, Alexander's public relations crisis finally exploded. A rival developer, sensing an opportunity to smear Alexander's carefully cultivated image, leaked rumors to the press. A small online tabloid ran an article alluding to a wealthy local magnate who secretly jetted off to an exclusive winter resort with his mistress, leaving a pregnant wife on Bedrest at home. Though the piece didn't name Alexander outright, the veiled references were obvious enough to those familiar with his status and recent travels. Social media caught wind, and speculation mounted. Some readers voiced outrage at the callousness of the alleged affair, while others dug for proof. Soon photos surfaced of Alexander and Ava sipping cocktails at a trendy Aspen lounge, grainy but undeniable. The scandal grew. Business acquaintances began distancing themselves, uncertain how the negative press would impact their own interests. Investors texted Alexander, demanding explanations. Even city council members, who once praised him for philanthropic initiatives, grew wary. Ava watched the fiasco unfold with a mix of pride and anger. Pride, because her role in Alexander's life was now undeniable. She wasn't just some fling hidden in the shadows. Anger, because he appeared to have gone back to his wife, shutting Ava out as though she were disposable. In an impulsive move, she issued a statement through her personal social media account, claiming she had been misled and that she had believed Alexander's marriage was effectively over. The post included a cryptic implication that Alexander had used her for his own gains. This only fueled the fire of speculation. As the scandal roiled, Alexander and Karen tried to shield Clara from the media onslaught. But it was impossible to insulate her fully. Headlines displayed on the television before Karen could switch channels, and notifications lit up Clara's phone with the latest gossip. Though her health slowly stabilized, Clara remained emotionally fragile, her anger tempered by the realization that it was safer for her unborn child if she avoided stress. She spoke little to Alexander, who tried in vain to apologize. Whenever he tried to approach her, she would turn away, tears glistening on her cheeks. Complicating matters further, Alexander's longtime investors began questioning his judgment. If he was so reckless in his personal life, how could they trust him with multi-million-dollar ventures? The local press hounded him for a statement. Camera crews parked outside the Pierce estate, hungry for footage of a teary confrontation or an outraged spouse. Even at the office, employees whispered about his downfall, uncertain whether the brand they worked for would survive this public debacle. Meanwhile, Karen wrestled with her own fury. She saw her daughter battling heartbreak, yet also recognized Clara's ongoing love for her husband. She debated whether they should leave Alexander, at least temporarily, to relieve Clara from the constant tension. But how would Clara fare on her own, especially with a high-risk pregnancy? Torn between motherly protectiveness and practical concerns, Karen watched as the once idyllic life her daughter had built came crashing down like a house of cards. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the estate's tall trees, Alexander received an unexpected visitor. It was Charles Beaumont Ava's older brother, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding the easy confidence of someone accustomed to negotiating deals. Charles barged into Alexander's office unannounced. Veronica tried to stop him, but he swept past her with purposeful strides. Shutting the office door behind him, Charles leveled a furious glare at Alexander. "My sister," he said, voice tight with controlled anger, "is the talk of the tabloids, and you've left her to hang in the wind. She's facing public humiliation, all because you can't keep your personal life in check." Alexander, already swimming in guilt, found his temper flaring at the intrusion. "Don't pretend Ava's an innocent victim," he replied. "She knew I was married. She was more than willing to jump in." Charles's fists clenched. "She's my sister. Right or wrong, I'll defend her. But I'm here to give you a chance to make things right by her and by your wife." Alexander frowned, unsure of where the conversation was headed. Charles went on to explain that Ava was contemplating a tell-all interview with a prominent media outlet. She wanted to clear her name, claiming she had been seduced under false pretenses. "Once that hits, you'll be dealing with a scandal far worse than a few leaked photos," Charles warned. The threat collided with Alexander's sense of desperation. If Ava went public, the headlines would multiply overnight. More tabloids would swarm, investors would withdraw, and the minimal trust Clara still had in him might be shattered beyond repair. On top of that, it would put enormous stress on her health. Sensing Alexander's alarm, Charles raised an eyebrow. "I can talk her out of it," he offered, "but it won't be free." It was a veiled demand, and Alexander recognized it instantly. Hush money. If he wanted Ava silent, he'd have to buy her off. Disgust churned in his stomach, but at the same time, a calculating part of him knew it might be the only way to salvage what little remained of his family life. With trembling hands, he told Charles he'd consider the terms. As Charles left, he threw one final remark over his shoulder: "Fix this before everyone gets burned." Shaken, Alexander paced his office, torn between the repulsiveness of being blackmailed and the urgent need to protect Clara from further distress. The affair had already cost him the respect of his loved ones, his employees, and now threatened to devour the financial empire he'd spent a lifetime building. Yet the one thing that scared him most was the possibility of losing Clara and their unborn child. No sum of money could replace them if the stress of scandal pushed her to another crisis. But could hush money truly fix this? As he stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, Alexander realized that even if he managed to keep Ava quiet, he'd still have to face the mess he created: the betrayal, the broken trust, and the emotional scars left on the wife he claimed to love. In the midst of that swirling chaos, Clara's labor pains began unexpectedly early. She was rushed to the hospital, with Alexander gripping her hand in the ambulance, tears streaming down his face. "Hold on, my love," he whispered, his voice choked. Despite her deep hurt, Clara clung to his hand, focusing on breathing through the pain. The tension in the ambulance was palpable. Karen, seated next to the paramedics, eyed Alexander with a complex mix of fear and anger. Over the next tense hours, doctors worked tirelessly to ensure a safe delivery. Clara's complications added an extra layer of concern, but at last, The piercing cry of a newborn echoed through the sterile hospital corridors. A baby boy, small but healthy enough, arrived into a world already burdened by secrets and scandals. Nurses congratulated the new parents, but the moment felt bittersweet. Clara's eyes filled with relief and maternal love, while Alexander held his son in trembling arms, overwhelmed by the miracle and the guilt pressing on his chest. In the hushed hours of the early morning, Alexander found himself alone with his newborn in the hospital's quiet nursery. He stared down at the tiny face, wondering how he had allowed greed and lust to overshadow the promise of this precious life. He recognized that he'd nearly lost everything that truly mattered. Resolving to fight for his family, he stepped out into the hallway to call Ava, ignoring the late hour. When she picked up, her voice was bitter. Before she could launch into accusations, Alexander spoke softly. "We have a child now. Please, just let us be. I'll do whatever it takes. Pay whatever sum Charles is asking. Just don't drag this into the spotlight. I need to focus on my wife and son." Ava hesitated. She had wanted a confrontation, but hearing Alexander's voice cracked with emotion gave her pause. Perhaps she sensed the gravity of the moment, or maybe Charles had already convinced her. There was a larger payoff in quiet acceptance. Whatever her motive, she finally agreed to hold off any interview for now. Days later, Clara was released from the hospital. While she was physically on the mend, their relationship was in dire need of a reckoning. Late one night, as their newborn slept in a cradle nearby, Clara confronted Alexander in the dimly lit nursery. She let him speak his piece about guilt, regret, and his vow to change. He promised to cut ties with Ava permanently, to be fully transparent, even offering to show her every aspect of his daily routine, if that's what it took to win back her trust. Clara, exhausted and conflicted, admitted that she still loved him. "But love alone isn't enough anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "You've broken something, Alexander. If there's any hope, you need to prove you can fix it. I'm not risking my life or our son's happiness on empty words." There, in the soft glow of a nightlight, they reached a fragile understanding. Alexander would seek therapy, possibly couples counseling if Clara was willing. He'd reevaluate his workaholic lifestyle, stepping back from the relentless pursuit of more. And if he ever broke her trust again, she would walk away for good, baby in tow. The next morning, Karen joined them in the nursery. She looked at her grandson, then at her daughter and son-in-law. Though anger still simmered beneath the surface, she recognized this as a tentative new beginning. Clara's needs and the baby's well-being come first, she reminded Alexander. "Don't ever forget that." He nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. Whether the damage was truly fixable would only be revealed in time. But for now, with a tiny new life cradled in Clara's arms, there was a flicker of hope in the silence, a single chance for healing in the face of betrayal. Thank you for journeying through this emotional roller coaster of secrets, scandal, and fragile second chances. The story of Alexander, Clara, and Ava stands as a raw reminder that even the most lavish fortunes can't buy loyalty or undo heartbreak. If this tale resonated with you, if you felt the tension in Aspen's snowy nights, or shared Clara's trembling resolve in that hospital room, then we invite you to stay connected. Show your support by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and, most importantly, subscribing to our channel. Your engagement fuels our commitment to bringing you more powerful narratives that both captivate and provoke thought. Be sure to share this video with friends who love a good drama, and stay tuned for upcoming stories that shine a light on life's most intricate twists. Remember, every share and subscription helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Millionaire posted Mistress on on Instagram. His pregnant wife filed for half. His net worth, prepare yourself for a roller coaster of deceit, betrayal, and retribution, so shocking that it feels ripped from the headlines. This isn't just a cautionary tale about a cheating husband. It's the explosive story of a millionaire who flaunted his mistress on Instagram while his loyal, pregnant wife watched her once perfect world crumble. What begins as an extravagant lifestyle soon spirals into a fierce battle for dignity, identity, and half of his sprawling fortune. You'll witness jaw-dropping twists, whispered secrets, and a storm of legal warfare. Stay tuned to discover how the echoes of one scandalous post rippled into a life-altering reckoning. David Chamberlain had crafted a gilded life from humble beginnings. With an unrelenting drive, he rose from the cramped apartment he'd once shared with his struggling mother to become the CEO of an innovative tech startup that was rumored to have caught the eye of Elon Musk himself. Evolving from a small project he coded in his dorm room into a company worth billions, Chamberlain Tech soared on David's vision. In the early days, he poured every ounce of energy into building prototypes, making calls and pitching to investors. Late-night programming sessions were fueled by microwaved ramen and potent energy drinks, symbols of the grit behind his success. He met Alicia Astor at a charity gala for underprivileged children in Silicon Valley when his star was just beginning its ascendancy. She was a university graduate in child psychology, volunteering her time to help kids from broken homes. Captivated by her warm smile and empathetic nature, David introduced himself, offering a donation that far surpassed her modest expectations. There was an immediate, genuine spark between them. She saw more than just a young, ambitious tech genius with a fat checkbook. She saw a man who could offer security, but also needed the emotional grounding her kind heart could provide. They married within a year, and Alicia, well aware of David's ambitious soul, stood by his side, supporting every bold new idea he generated. Their first child, Emily, arrived 2 years into the marriage, further cementing the narrative of a dream-come-true romance. From the outside, looking in, the Chamberlains were the epitome of modern success: youth, glamour, money, and a philanthropic spirit that aligned perfectly with Alicia's compassionate roots. Yet behind the picture-perfect Instagram posts lay the silent expansions of David's ego, small fissures that would one day widen into a chasm of betrayal. If there was one rule Alicia had, it was to keep personal matters private. She hated public spectacles. Though comfortable attending charity galas and philanthropic events by David's side, she avoided the camera lens whenever possible. But David, fueled by the validation of his 2 million Instagram followers, increasingly viewed privacy as an obstacle to his personal brand. Where Alicia saw vulnerability, David saw an opportunity to cement his image as a self-made mogul, complete with the glamorous spouse and adorable child. Whenever a major milestone happened, closing another venture capital deal, unveiling a new product at a tech conference, David's phone was out, snapping pictures, tagging collaborators, and building a narrative of relentless triumph. Alicia, while proud of his accomplishments, sometimes felt overshadowed by it all. Often she would get texts from friends who saw David's posts before Alicia ever heard the news. It was as if David was living in a swirling galaxy of digital applause, while she remained tethered to a more grounded reality of doctor's appointments for Emily, grocery runs, and quiet evenings at home. The distance only grew when Alicia discovered she was pregnant for the second time. Although David was thrilled at first, posting a heartfelt announcement online to his followers, he soon returned to his swirling schedule of business travels, late-night coding sprints, and networking events. He was planning expansions to Chamberlain Tech's new mobile application suite, with rumored negotiations involving a major Silicon Valley investor group that had once backed Tesla. By the time Alicia reached her second trimester, David had grown so immersed in corporate life that their conversations felt more like board meetings. Her gentle pleas for him to slow down, to show up for the next ultrasound, or be present for Emily's kindergarten recital, seemed to drift past him without consequence. Sabrina Rossi was as hungry for fame as David was for financial success. 23 gorgeous and an Instagram influencer, with a rapidly growing audience, Sabrina had been on the fringes of Silicon Valley's social scene for months, strategically targeting wealthy men and well-connected tech magnates. She posted pictures of her lavish vacations in Bora Bora, her decked-out condo in Miami, and the VIP parties she attended in Los Angeles. It was rumored she had once snagged an invitation to a private event hosted by the Kardashian family, though no verifiable photos ever emerged. Her approach to life was as transactional as David's approach to business. Every move had to yield benefits, be it likes, brand sponsorships, or an alliance with a millionaire capable of feeding her desired celebrity status. She appeared one evening at a tech networking event where David was the keynote speaker. Her shimmering black dress drew gazes from all corners, but her eyes were locked onto only one man, David Chamberlain. She approached him after the speech, gushing over how she admired innovators who disrupt industries, and how she had always dreamed of being a tech entrepreneur if she hadn't chosen her influencer journey. The lines were cliché, but the combination of her magnetism and David's ego-laden thirst for admiration sparked an instant connection. They exchanged numbers under the pretense of possible collaboration, but Alicia's name was never mentioned. Sabrina played her part with calculated ease, and David, high on the adrenaline of success, found it exhilarating to have someone who seemed so in awe of his every word. In a life that had become a routine of board meetings and family obligations, Sabrina felt like a new technology waiting to be explored. A guilty rush danced in his veins each time he texted her, while Alicia's gentle presence at home was overshadowed by Sabrina's bold, flirtatious energy. It began, innocently enough, coffee meetups where they'd discuss social media strategies for Chamberlain Tech. Sabrina had a knack for hype, and David saw potential in using her influencer status to break into younger markets. Soon, casual drinks followed. Amid the neon hum of swanky hotel bars, Sabrina's conversation steered them away from business proposals toward after-hours confessions of desire. Every time David caught a glimpse of her swirling her wine glass or laughing at his jokes with wide, admiring eyes, he felt 10 years younger, as though stepping back into a time before fatherhood and the weight of corporate responsibilities. Alicia, nearing her 6th month of pregnancy, sensed something shifting. David came home later offering vague excuses about beta testing and urgent midnight calls with overseas investors. Her attempts to communicate her worries were met with weary sighs or irritability. She even tried suggesting they attend marriage counseling, but David brushed it off, insisting he was just in the busiest quarter of the year. Sabrina shrewd about her path to the top planted subtle seeds of tension. She would text David at odd hours with urgent crises, often expecting immediate emotional support. In truth, these crises were carefully orchestrated hooks to reel him closer, to separate him emotionally from Alicia. The more he responded, the more she gained power. And David felt conflicted. He was intellectually aware that he was doing something morally questionable, yet he rationalized it away, telling himself Alicia never seemed to understand his ambition as thoroughly as Sabrina did. In the background, Alicia's pregnancy advanced. She felt drained physically and emotionally. her maternal glow overshadowed by an unnamed dread. Late one night, she scrolled through David's Instagram feed. Among the business posts and motivational quotes, there was a new face in the background of multiple photos, a glamorous brunette with a curated aesthetic. Alicia's heart pounded, though she couldn't fully articulate why. She just knew something was terribly amiss. One chilly November evening, Alicia decided to confront David after noticing a suspicious charge on his credit card statement for a 5-star hotel suite. She was aware that some business meetings took place in posh venues, but the date coincided with an evening David was supposedly out with his development team until dawn. Summoning her courage, she asked him, point blank, "Who is Sabrina Rossi?" David froze, eyes flickering from confusion to alarm. He tried to brush it off as a business influencer, someone who had been helping him with brand collaborations. But Alicia had done her homework. She knew Sabrina's entire online presence radiated flirtation and flaunted a lifestyle built around leveraging wealthy connections. The heartbreak in Alicia's eyes threatened to break David's carefully curated composure. At first, he denied everything. He painted Alicia as irrational, blaming her hormones for conjuring illusions of betrayal. When Alicia produced screenshots, Sabrina's photos from the same hotel room on the same night, David's narrative came undone. With nowhere to hide, he lashed out. "It's not what it looks like. She's just a friend, a vital PR contact. You wouldn't understand how these things work." He insisted Alicia couldn't believe the audacity. She demanded he cut off all contact with Sabrina and refocus on the family, especially with their unborn child on the way. David agreed in words, but his body language told another story. His phone was buzzing with new messages, even as he made empty promises. He assured Alicia it was over, that he'd made a mistake, but inwardly he felt trapped. Caught between the allure of Sabrina's excitement and the familiar, stable reality Alicia offered. As he walked away to sleep in the guest bedroom that night, Alicia was left in tears, cradling her pregnant belly, wondering how their once idyllic marriage had drifted so far off course. For several weeks, Alicia monitored David's behavior with cautious optimism, hoping he had truly severed ties. But the reality exploded on a random Sunday morning when she woke up to a barrage of text messages from friends. "Have you seen David's new Instagram post?" one read. Nervous energy gripped her chest as she tapped on the app. There, in high definition, was David on a yacht in the Caribbean, with his arm draped intimately around Sabrina. His caption read, "Finding new horizons in business and life. Blessed entrepreneur lifestyle." Alicia's mind whirled. How could he be so brazen? Not only had David lied about cutting ties, but he had also chosen to flaunt the affair publicly. She felt a shockwave of embarrassment and betrayal, imagining what their friends, her family, and even business associates must be thinking. Calls from her parents went unanswered. She hid in the guest bathroom to sob, trying to collect herself enough to confront her husband. David returned home late that evening, wearing an expression that wavered between defiance and regret. The argument that ensued was volcanic. Alicia demanded an explanation, brandishing screenshots of comments on his Instagram post that were equal parts congratulatory and scandalous. Some followers appeared to celebrate David's freedom, while others openly shamed him for what looked like an extramarital affair. David tried to spin a half-hearted narrative about brand building and social media stunts, but it fell flat. There was no plausible excuse for the betrayal. Humiliation gave way to fury. Alicia declared she'd had enough. She could no longer stand by a man who cared more about likes and clout than his marriage and the safety of their unborn child. Storming off, she warned him that he would regret this moment, that she would take action, and that the blowback would be more than just a PR nightmare. It was the first time David truly glimpsed the magnitude of the tempest he had unleashed. The very next morning, Alicia contacted her friend Julia Price, a paralegal who worked for a prestigious law firm in downtown San Francisco. Julia, alarmed by the meltdown on social media, connected Alicia with a high-powered attorney, Evelyn Harrison, who had once represented high-profile clients, such as Hollywood celebrities and top-level executives. Evelyn was known for her no-nonsense approach and her ironclad negotiations. She wasted no time laying out the path forward. "Alicia, you have every right to protect your interests," Evelyn said during their first meeting. "He's flaunting his mistress publicly. Don't let him manipulate the narrative. The court will see how irresponsible this is, especially with you carrying his child." Though Alicia felt a wave of relief, she was also terrified. She had lived in David's shadow for so long, trusting his decisions, supporting his ambitions. Now she was about to go head-to-head with him in what could become a legal war. Evelyn explained the complexities: community property, spousal support, child support, and the potential division of David's towering net worth, estimated to be hundreds of millions, if not more, given his shares in Chamberlain Tech. David, upon learning of Alicia's consultation with a fearsome attorney, attempted to dissuade her from taking legal action. In frantic phone calls, he insisted they could work it out, or that things had been blown out of proportion. Yet his apologies rang hollow, especially with Sabrina continuing to post cryptic Instagram stories, suggesting her deepening involvement with David, pictures of expensive gifts, cryptic references to my love, and even rumors about her traveling to tech conferences with him. With each new social media post, Alicia's resolve hardened. She deserved respect, and she couldn't stand idly by while David flaunted Sabrina for the world to see. Evelyn's strategy was clear. They would file for divorce, aiming for half of David's net worth, plus significant child support and spousal support, a demand designed to sting enough to bring him to the negotiation table. If not to his knees, Sabrina and David seemed determined to live out their romantic fantasy under the public gaze. Sabrina posted a boomerang video of the two clinking champagne glasses set against the backdrop of the Golden Gate Bridge. Comments poured in, some praising them for their confidence, others condemning the reckless display of infidelity. The scandal quickly surpassed the boundaries of David's personal life, bleeding into his professional sphere. Chamberlain Tech employees were confused, embarrassed, and fearful about the company's future. Investors began questioning David's judgment. Did his personal recklessness hint at a lack of prudence in managing the company's direction? Journalists, ever hungry for sensational stories, clamored for interviews. Tech blogs that once lauded David as the rising star of Silicon Valley pivoted, labeling him as another cautionary tale of success gone to his head. Behind the scenes, Alicia grew increasingly anxious. She could hardly leave the house without paparazzi lurking around the gates, hoping to snap pictures of the scorned wife. She hated the sudden attention. Once a private person, she now found her name splashed on gossip websites alongside Sabrina's. She even spotted a viral TikTok dissecting the love triangle in lurid detail. Despite the onslaught, Alicia stood firm with Evelyn's legal plan. They filed a petition for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking half of David's net worth on the grounds of community property. Evelyn pointed out that California was particularly unforgiving in high-stakes divorces, especially when undeniable proof of infidelity existed. Alicia was no gold digger. She was a partner who had supported David from his earliest days. If he was determined to break their vows, the law would protect her and her children's future. The press caught wind of the legal filing, turning it into front-page fodder. Hashtags like Call Team Alicia and #Team Sabrina circulated on social media. In the swirl of digital chaos, David found himself at a tipping point. Either he would reevaluate his actions and take accountability, or he would double down and risk losing everything he had worked for. In a stroke of misguided bravado, David tried to spin the scandal to his advantage. He hired a PR firm known for salvaging tarnished reputations, the same firm that once handled crises for certain Hollywood elite. Their strategy was to paint David as a misunderstood genius whose private life had been misrepresented by sensationalist media. Sabrina was coached to adopt the role of a supportive partner, someone who understood the pressures of the tech world more than Alicia supposedly ever did. The PR campaign quickly backfired. Within days-old interviews of Alicia praising David's philanthropic initiatives surfaced. Clips of the couple's wedding video spread online, showing Alicia giving a heartfelt speech about partnership and loyalty. Comment sections lit up with outrage. How could David betray such a caring spouse, especially during pregnancy? Even mainstream news outlets, which had previously lauded David's entrepreneurial achievements, highlighted the hypocrisy of his PR narrative. Sabrina's Instagram, once a glossy showcase of poolside selfies and fashionable outfits, now brimmed with a different kind of attention, accusations of home-wrecking, gold-digging, and cheap fame-chasing undeterred. Sabrina posted a story about her undying love for David, fueling further media frenzy. The more they tried to control the narrative, the more it slipped from their grasp. Meanwhile, Alicia maintained a dignified silence, listening to Evelyn's advice to let the legal filing speak for itself. In private, though she battled waves of vulnerability, she worried about Emily and the unborn child, about how they'd cope with living under the microscope of national gossip. Late at night, she'd journal her fears, her heartbreak, and her anger. She reminded herself that she had moral support, not just from her close friends, but from strangers online who rallied behind her story of betrayal. The real court of public opinion was making a clear statement. David had made a catastrophic mistake, and the tide of sympathy was overwhelmingly in Alicia's favor. While David tried to salvage his crumbling public persona, his board of directors at Chamberlain Tech was far from pleased. The company's valuation was intrinsically tied to David's reputation as an innovative leader. Shareholders were uneasy. Some threatened to pull out their investments if David's personal scandal continued to overshadow the company's breakthroughs. Rumors swirled that an older, more conservative investor, rumored to be Bill Gates's former associate, was considering withdrawing a sizable chunk of capital over moral objections. During a tense emergency board meeting, David faced an onslaught of criticism. Several directors urged him to step back temporarily as CEO until the divorce and scandal could be resolved. They argued that the media circus was distracting from Chamberlain. Tech's upcoming product launch, an advanced AI platform that had been in development for 2 years, David insisted his personal life would not affect the company's trajectory. But the skepticism in the room was palpable. Sabrina's presence only aggravated matters. She showed up unannounced to the company's headquarters, sharing Instagram stories from inside the lavish lobby, captioned with phrases like, "Visiting Bay's Empire." High-level employees were livid. Her intrusion felt invasive, disrespectful, and unprofessional. Every action Sabrina took seemed to sabotage the stability David desperately tried to preserve. Meanwhile, Alicia's legal team sensed David's vulnerability. Evelyn quietly gathered evidence of David's questionable corporate expenses. Lavish gifts for Sabrina, billed as business development costs. She prepared to leverage these details in negotiations, knowing that a potential scandal involving misuse of corporate funds could be the final blow. Caught in the crossfire, David grew increasingly erratic, lashing out at employees and ignoring critical deadlines. The cracks in his once impenetrable empire were becoming fissures threatening to swallow his dreams. And all the while, the clock ticked down toward the final hearing that would determine the fate of his marriage, his fortune, and perhaps even his beloved company. While David spiraled, Alicia underwent a remarkable transformation. Forced to confront her heartbreak, head-on she found solace in therapy sessions and the support of a dedicated group of friends. She also reconnected with her college roommate, Sophia Park, who happened to be a successful lifestyle coach. Sophia spent countless hours guiding Alicia through mindful breathing, journaling exercises, and confidence-building techniques. What emerged from this emotional crucible was a stronger, more self-possessed Alicia. She recognized that the life she'd invested in countless nights waiting for David, overshadowed by his ambitions, could be replaced by a future defined on her terms. She reevaluated her own career aspirations. Once upon a time, she'd dreamed of opening a holistic child development center. Now, with the possibility of a substantial divorce settlement, the dream could become a reality. Alicia also dug deeper into her philanthropic work, channeling her energy into programs for single mothers. She collaborated with local organizations to provide financial literacy workshops and prenatal care advice, sharing her own story to inspire others in similarly vulnerable positions. In an ironic twist, the sympathy wave garnered by her betrayal story turned her into a minor public figure. People gravitated to her honesty and courage. Emily, sensing her mother's resilience, responded positively. Though too young to grasp the full complexity of the situation, she felt the warmth of Alicia's unwavering presence. Alicia promised herself she would protect her children from the fallout of David's decisions. If nothing else, she wanted them to see that adversity could be met with dignity. With each day, Alicia stepped out of the shadows of David's social media glow and into her own authentic light. The woman who once deferred all decisions to her husband was now making bold moves to secure her family's future, and that more than any legal motion or viral hashtag would be the true testament to Alicia's unbreakable spirit. Unbeknownst to David, Sabrina had her own agenda. She'd carefully documented every extravagant gift, every secret text thread, and every late-night liaison. In her phone was a treasure trove of incriminating messages, David venting about the board of directors, ranting about Alicia, even joking about misrepresenting company expenses. Sabrina understood the game. She had watched men like David unravel under the weight of hubris before, and she intended to capitalize on that unraveling. Her social media persona grew bolder. She frequently posted cryptic images, like a collage of expensive handbags tagged "Was a thank you miking," or a screenshot of a text message from a sender labeled D, praising her beauty and worth. In direct messages to her closest friends, she bragged about having David wrapped around her finger. Yet those same friends observed with skepticism. Some even warned her that playing with fire could lead to devastating consequences. David, blinded by infatuation, failed to see Sabrina's manipulations. He was enthralled by her compliments, the sexual chemistry, and the illusion of a life unburdened by moral obligations. Even as Chamberlain Tech wobbled under the pressure of the scandal, David clung to Sabrina like a life raft in a swirling ocean of public criticism and personal shame. One morning, an anonymous tip reached Alicia's legal team. Sabrina had approached a tabloid offering exclusive details about David's personal life and business dealings in exchange for a hefty fee. If the story broke, it could irreparably damage David's standing, perhaps even invite regulatory scrutiny into Chamberlain Tech. Alicia felt a pang of pity for the man she once loved. However, Evelyn seized on the opportunity. "We can use this," she said. "We'll pressure David to settle the divorce terms quickly and favorably for you, or we'll let Sabrina take him down with her next stunt." Behind the scenes, Sabrina hovered like an ominous cloud, poised to rain chaos on both David's personal and professional worlds. It was only a matter of time before her true intentions became painfully clear. And by then, it might be too late for David to undo the damage. Alarmed by whispers that Sabrina was selling stories to the tabloids, David confronted her in a swanky penthouse suite he'd rented for their rendezvous. Eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, he demanded she explain herself. Sabrina feigned outrage, accusing him of not trusting her. She shed a few tears, flipping the script so convincingly that David felt guilty for even questioning her loyalty. Soothed by her performance, David proposed a risky move. "Let's go public officially," he said, voice trembling with desperation. He reasoned that if they controlled the narrative, they could quell the rumors. He dreamed of a fresh start, a phoenix-like rebirth from the ashes of his broken marriage. Sabrina pretended to be hesitant, letting him grovel for a moment, before nodding in faux agreement. Their plan was to host a press conference, announcing their love, framing it as a post-separation romance, conveniently ignoring the fact that Alicia was still pregnant with David's child, and that the separation hadn't even been finalized. As they mapped out talking points and media invites, Sabrina secretly recorded the conversation. After David left, she sent snippets to her tabloid contact, ensuring the story would break with maximum sensationalism. The press conference would transform into a fiasco, one that Sabrina could exploit to boost her fame and possibly land a lucrative reality TV deal. Meanwhile, Alicia and Evelyn watched the fiasco unfold from the sidelines. They knew David was playing with fire, and Sabrina was clearly the one holding the matchbook. Evelyn calmly advised Alicia to be prepared for any outcome. This could actually strengthen our position if David publicly humiliates himself. She noted Alicia torn between wanting David to face justice and mourning the demise of the man she once adored, braced herself for the storm that was about to descend. On a bright Wednesday afternoon, cameras flashed furiously as David and Sabrina took their places at a hastily assembled podium in a hotel ballroom. Journalists from tech magazines, gossip tabloids, and mainstream networks packed the room. David had envisioned a controlled, triumphant display of unity with his mistress-turned-partner. The reality was anything but controlled. From the start, reporters assaulted them with questions. How could you betray your pregnant wife? Is it true Chamberlain Tech's new product launch is delayed because of your personal crisis? Are you aware Sabrina has been shopping stories to tabloids? David's attempt to steer the narrative collapsed as he stumbled through a muddled speech about growth, personal freedom, and complex emotions. Sabrina tried to appear composed, batting her eyelashes innocently, as if she were the victim of a cruel media game, but the barrage was relentless. Some journalists read aloud quotes attributed to a close source, detailing David's questionable corporate spending on Sabrina's lifestyle. One even mentioned the alleged text messages, where David boasted about pulling the wool over his shareholders' eyes. The color drained from David's face. Suddenly, Sabrina's phone started buzzing incessantly at the podium. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. A major tabloid had just leaked screenshots of her communications with David, intimate messages about funneling money through dummy accounts, disparaging remarks about the board of directors, and worst of all, vile insults aimed at Alicia. Gasps filled the room as reporters received the leak in real time, their phones lighting up with scandalous notifications. David stood there stunned as the crowd erupted in chaos. Sabrina played shocked, but the corners of her lips betrayed a slight upward curl. It was a public execution, and David had all but handed Sabrina the axe. He stumbled off the stage, ignoring Sabrina's crocodile tears, the cameras trailing him mercilessly. This was more than just a PR nightmare. It was the meltdown of David Chamberlain's life. Within hours of the disastrous press conference, Chamberlain Tech's stock value plummeted. Board members convened an emergency meeting in which they voted to remove David from his role as CEO, at least temporarily, pending an internal investigation into financial misconduct. The fallout spread like wildfire, leading major investors to question whether the company had lost its innovative edge under the weight of scandal. David, feeling cornered, lashed out at Sabrina in a series of frantic text messages, accusing her of orchestrating the leak. She denied everything, spinning a tale of innocence and heartbreak, claiming she'd been hacked. Yet her Instagram posts told a different story. Less than 24 hours after the press conference debacle, she posted a glamorous selfie in which she declared she was ready for new beginnings. Public speculation ran wild. Was Sabrina moving on already, or was she merely reveling in the attention? Meanwhile, Alicia quietly finalized the divorce settlement negotiations through Evelyn. Armed with a mountain of incriminating evidence, they demanded a hefty sum, an amount that would provide financial security for Alicia Emily and the unborn child for the rest of their lives. David was in no position to argue. His reputation was in tatters, and any prolonged legal battle would only dig him deeper into the grave he'd begun to shovel at that press conference. Privately, Alicia wrestled with a torrent of emotions. She was relieved to see justice served, but a lingering sadness flickered inside her. She recalled the days when David was still that idealistic entrepreneur, coding away in a tiny apartment, fueled by big dreams rather than hubris. In the quiet of her bedroom, she placed a hand on her swollen belly, whispering promises of a better life for the child she was about to bring into the world, far from the chaos David had created. At a nondescript courthouse in San Francisco, David and Alicia sat across from each other, flanked by their respective legal teams. The air was tense, a swirl of unspoken apologies and irreversible choices. David wore a gaunt expression. The once confident grin had long vanished. Alicia, though visibly pregnant, carried herself with quiet poise. Evelyn presented the final agreement. Alicia would receive half of David's existing assets, a substantial monthly child support package for both Emily and the new baby, and additional spousal support for a set number of years. The division included real estate investments, stocks, and even rights to certain intellectual properties. Though Alicia had no intention of meddling in Chamberlain Tech's operational decisions, she would hold a meaningful financial stake in any future profits. The judge overseeing the process asked each party to confirm their acceptance. David hesitated for a moment. He glanced at Alicia, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. He couldn't recognize the warm, loving wife who had once looked at him like he was the center of her world. Now she wore the steely gaze of a woman who had been deeply wounded, yet refused to let that wound define her finally. David mumbled, "Yes, I accept." With the stroke of a pen, the judge solidified what was already a foregone conclusion. Alicia was free. David was no longer her husband, no longer the father figure she had once idealized, and for a moment, the gravity of his choices pressed down on him like an unbearable weight. Exiting the courtroom, Alicia felt an overwhelming release, as though she'd just emerged from a dark tunnel into sunlight. She saw no sense in gloating. She had simply claimed what was fair for her and her children. If David's downfall was a result of his hubris and Sabrina's opportunism, then so be it. Karma had a way of unfolding on its own. Timetable, David's life, began unraveling at breakneck speed. Chamberlain Tech's board held a public announcement, naming its interim CEO, an experienced executive from a rival firm investors, were momentarily appeased, but the long-term damage to the company's brand remained uncertain. In the days following the divorce, tabloids continued to drip-feed scandalous details from Sabrina audio clips surfaced of David mocking the philanthropic endeavors he once championed, alongside Alicia, calling them mere PR stunts to get investors' goodwill. Text messages revealed his contempt for certain board members, labeling them dinosaurs. The drip-drip of damaging evidence ensured David's reputation sank further each day. The financial toll was just as punishing. Without access to corporate funds or stock options he'd lost upon his removal, David had to rely on his personal savings, which took a massive hit from the divorce settlement. He sold off luxury cars and cancelled memberships to exclusive clubs to free up cash. The sprawling suburban mansion he'd purchased was now a painful reminder of the family he had shattered. In a desperate attempt to salvage his once-admired status, David reached out to some philanthropic organizations for partnerships. None were interested. His name had become radioactive, a cautionary tale of personal greed overshadowing professional brilliance. Ironically, Chamberlain Tech's new leadership saw a slight rebound in the stock price. Once David's ouster was confirmed, a testament to how quickly markets can forget a fallen titan. As David scrolled through social media, he saw Alicia's new beginning, her calm smiles in pictures with Emily, the kindness of her supporters. A swirl of emotions battered him: regret, envy, longing, and an acute sense that he had become the architect of his own destruction. He had reached out for the mirage of a more exciting life, only to realize too late that he already had everything he needed. Alicia moved into a charming, mid-century house perched on a quiet hillside, offering a view of San Francisco's glittering skyline. It wasn't as ostentatious as the mansion she once shared with David, but it felt infinitely more like home. Friends and family helped with the move, and Emily was thrilled to decorate her new room with pastel walls and star-shaped fairy lights. As the weeks passed, Alicia took steps toward opening her dream child development center. She called it Bright Horizons, a nod to the promising life she intended to create for her children. The money from the divorce settlement, while substantial, was more than just a safety net. It was a springboard. She invested in a staff of educators, psychologists and therapists, each dedicated to nurturing the cognitive and emotional growth of children. There was a modest ribbon-cutting ceremony, with local families and community leaders attending. A tech journalist, who had once covered David's success story, showed up to do a profile on Alicia's venture, instead a sign that people were interested in her version of success now. Outside of work, Alicia found peace in simple joys: quiet dinners with Emily, prenatal yoga classes, and the support of close friends. Sophia visited regularly, celebrating each small victory, whether it was a successful fundraiser for Bright Horizons or simply a day where Alicia felt content. Public sympathy still poured in handwritten letters, supportive comments on her social media posts, and even offers from other women's organizations wanting to collaborate. Alicia carefully chose her partnerships, keeping her focus on genuine impact rather than media hype. She had learned the hard way how intoxicating publicity could become. Every night before going to bed, she paused by a framed photograph of Emily and David from happier times. She allowed herself a moment to grieve the family they could have been, then turned off the lights, choosing to embrace the promise of a new tomorrow, rather than the ghosts of the past. Without David's financial backing, Sabrina Rossi faced her own wave of repercussions. Her clout on social media spiked briefly after the scandal, but began to taper off once the news cycle moved on to fresher gossip. Brand sponsorships she relied on for income became scarce. Reputable companies didn't want to associate with someone so intimately tied to a scandal. She still lived off the lavish gifts David had once showered her with, but those funds dwindled quickly. Sabrina attempted to pivot her image, releasing a string of YouTube videos about self-empowerment, claiming she was a misunderstood woman who had simply fallen in love with the wrong man. The public response was tepid. At best, many saw her as a manipulator who rode David's coattails and threw him under the bus for fame. Offers to star in reality, TV shows materialized, but none came with the high paychecks she had envisioned. Producers wanted drama, conflict, and scandal. Sabrina quickly realized she was only valuable to them as long as she stirred controversy. One day, she posted a tearful confession video, disclaiming she never intended to hurt Alicia or ruin a marriage. Instead of garnering sympathy, the video attracted an onslaught of sarcastic comments and memes. People questioned the sincerity of her tears. It became clear that her 15 minutes of notoriety were nearly up, and she had no stable platform to cushion her fall. She found herself paying for her own glamorous lifestyle, now that David's finances were out of reach. Between credit card debt and dwindling offers, Sabrina stared at an uncertain future. In a final attempt at salvaging her influencer status, she teased a tell-all book, but the public had moved on. Interest in the David Chamberlain saga waned once the divorce concluded, and new tech dramas took center stage. What she'd hoped would be her big break had ironically become her downfall, a sobering lesson that chasing fame at any cost often ends in loneliness, debt, and irrelevance. News eventually reached David that Alicia had gone into labor, torn between guilt and a lingering sense of paternal duty. He rushed to the hospital. He arrived awkwardly uncertain of his place in a moment he had forfeited by his betrayal. At first, Alicia's friends and family barred him from the delivery room, but Alicia, in a gesture of compassion, allowed him a brief visit. She wanted their child to have some semblance of a father, even if he'd abandoned the family before. When he laid eyes on his newborn son, a wave of emotion nearly overwhelmed him. Tiny fingers, soft cries, a fragile new life. David felt the sharp pang of realization that he had sacrificed the joy of these moments for fleeting thrills and social media vanity. He cradled his son for a few minutes, tears blurring his vision. Alicia watched quietly, sharing in the bitter sweetness of the scene. For a fleeting instant, they almost seemed like the young couple they once were, wide-eyed, hopeful, and united by love for their child. But the chasm between them was too vast. After the baby's vitals were declared stable, a nurse gently ushered David out. Alicia's family gave him cold stares, reminding him of the trust and respect he had shattered. As he left the hospital, David recognized that fatherhood, a role he had once embraced so proudly, was now conditional. If he wanted to be a part of his children's lives, he would have to rebuild their faith in him from the ground up, and there was no guarantee he'd succeed. Later that night, David walked alone along a deserted beach, the sound of crashing waves echoing his inner turmoil. He held a photo of his newborn son the nurse had printed. In that moment, he understood that while Alicia might one day forgive, she would never forget. If redemption was possible, it would require more than empty words or grand gestures. It would demand a metamorphosis of character he wasn't sure he could achieve. Weeks turned into months. David lived in a modest condo, far removed from the extravagance of his past. Chamberlain Tech had stabilized under new leadership, and while David still owned some shares, albeit reduced by the divorce settlement, his voice in the company was minimal. He spent his days consulting for smaller tech firms, picking up freelance coding jobs, and wrestling with the humiliating reality of being overshadowed by an affair that had defined him. During this period of reflection, he began attending therapy sessions. He confronted uncomfortable truths about his obsession with external validation, his fear of appearing weak, and the emptiness he felt despite his material success. Slowly, he learned to separate his identity from his net worth. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing the next big accolade or Instagram milestone. He was simply trying to become a better man. With Alicia's cautious permission, David started visiting Emily on the weekends. He played board games with her in Alicia's new home, careful to respect boundaries. Alicia observed these interactions with a guarded heart. She recognized genuine remorse in David's eyes. But trust wasn't something that could be instantly resurrected. The newborn boy named Oliver was too young to comprehend the complexities of their situation. Yet David's attempts to hold him, feed him, and change diapers were small, but sincere gestures toward redemption. Though Alicia didn't waver in her decision to move on, she saw value in letting David be a father to their children. Their co-parenting arrangement became less tense over time, a civil framework built on the shared love of Emily and Oliver. No grand reconciliation was on the horizon, but at least the children had the opportunity to know both parents in some capacity. And David, humbled by the consequences of his actions, took each visitation as a gift, a chance to rewrite, if only partially, the narrative he had so carelessly shattered. Bright Horizons, the child development center Alicia had founded, blossomed into a thriving sanctuary for kids from diverse backgrounds. Mornings were filled with laughter, finger painting, and early learning games. Afternoons hosted guided mindfulness sessions where older children practiced coping strategies for anxiety or low self-esteem. Local media praised the center, naming it a beacon of hope in a turbulent world. Alicia took pride not only in the program's success, but also in the difference it made for families in need. She formed partnerships with local schools, offering scholarships and sliding-scale fees for low-income parents. On weekends, she opened the center's auditorium for parenting workshops, where mental health professionals shared strategies on positive reinforcement, emotional regulation, and the importance of nurturing a child's creativity. The initiative drew the attention of philanthropic circles, leading to a partnership with a notable charity, chaired by Melinda Gates's foundation, an opportunity that symbolized how far Alicia had come from the chaos of scandal. Though she shied away from the camera, she occasionally gave interviews, emphasizing her commitment to children's well-being, rather than dwelling on her personal drama. Still, the occasional intrusive question would surface about her ex-husband. Alicia's polite, measured responses underscored her focus on the present and future, not the transgressions of the past. Emily thrived in this environment, often volunteering to help younger kids with art projects. Oliver, just learning to crawl, became a beloved fixture. Staff members doted on him, and Alicia felt reassured knowing her own child would be reared in an atmosphere of compassion and growth. At night, Alicia sometimes let her guard down momentarily, reflecting on how drastically her life had changed. She had been the millionaire's trophy wife, shy, overshadowed, and defined by someone else's achievements. Now she was a recognized leader in child development, forging a legacy that was undeniably her own. One gray afternoon, David showed up at Bright Horizons for a scheduled meeting about Emily's progress. This would be the first time he'd seen the facility Alicia had built from the ground up. Despite the residual tension, Alicia greeted him professionally, introducing him to some of the staff, and proudly walking him through the vibrant classrooms. The children's artwork lined the walls, and child-friendly furniture was arranged to inspire exploration and creativity. David seemed genuinely impressed. "You've done well," he said softly, his gaze lingering on a collage that Emily had made. I'm proud of you. Alicia offered a polite nod. Though she appreciated the sentiment, her walls remained intact. She remembered how easily David's words had once swayed her. Now she needed consistency, not compliments. Still, there was an air of calm acceptance between them, neither fully forgiven nor wholly estranged. Before leaving, David asked if he could speak privately with Alicia. Reluctantly, she agreed, guiding him to an empty corner of the hall. I just wanted to say, he began, eyes downcast. I'm sorry for everything. Truly, you deserved better. Alicia took a breath, each heartbeat echoing the gravity of their past. I accept your apology, she replied. But that doesn't erase what happened. He nodded, wiping at his eyes. I know, I'm just grateful I still get to see the kids. That's what matters now, she said, and for a moment their gazes met a silent acknowledgement of the life they'd once built and broken. They parted ways, a fragile peace hovering in the air. Though they would never return to the effortless intimacy of their early years, there was a mutual understanding that the well-being of Emily and Oliver transcended past grievances. It was a flicker of closure, a subtle sign that while some wounds may never fully heal, life could still move forward with grace. Time is a patient judge. Months turned into a year and life settled into a new normal. David continued his therapy, occasionally consulting for small startups. He lived modestly, keeping a low profile. Though many Silicon Valley circles still regarded him with mistrust, a few entrepreneurs welcomed his expertise, albeit at a fraction of what he once commanded. It was humbling, but he accepted it as part of his penance. Sabrina, on the other hand, vanished from mainstream attention. Her social media pages turned stale. The last few posts, desperate attempts to drum up interest in a rumored reality show that never materialized. Rumor had it she moved to another city, hoping for a fresh start. But in an industry that thrived on shiny new stories, her time had come and gone. Alicia's star soared not in the glitzy sense David had once chased, but in an authentic, community-based manner. Bright Horizons expanded to a second location, thanks to a generous grant from a philanthropic tech foundation. Alicia chaired roundtable discussions on early childhood education and even co-authored an academic paper on the benefits of emotional intelligence curricula. For those who followed the scandal, it appeared that karma had balanced the scales. The millionaire who once reveled in flaunting a mistress on Instagram saw his empire shaken to its core, paying dearly in both love and fortune. The pregnant wife, humiliated, yet resolute, found a path to empowerment and meaningful impact. Their children, though living in a broken home dynamic, were loved and cared for by a mother who refused to let betrayal define their future. In the end, life had moved on, leaving behind a cautionary tale about ego fame and the consequences of betrayal, a tale David Chamberlain would continue to live with long after the headlines faded. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. We've witnessed how one social media post lit the fuse on a marriage already strained, unraveling not just a family, but also a tech empire built on ambition. Yet amid the aftermath of public humiliation and personal loss, we found a beacon of hope in Alicia's unwavering resolve to rise above adversity and create a life of purpose for herself and her children. Her triumph serves as a powerful reminder that from the ashes of betrayal, we can grow stronger, more focused and more determined to carve our own path. If you found this story gripping, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's keep exploring tales that remind us of life's fragility and our incredible capacity to rebuild when everything seems lost. Your support means the world. So stay tuned for more.